right, everyone, welcome back. So this is going to be for modules 6 through 8 for Unit 2, and we are going to start with correlational studies. So we already talked about the survey, we already talked about case study, and we talked about naturalistic observations, right? So now our next way of experimenting, or sorry, should I say research method, is correlational studies. So please make sure you start like a new place for your notes. So correlational studies are about how two things relate, right? So when one trait or behavior accompanies another, we say that they correlate or they have a relationship. So if you guys want to say a relationship instead of correlate, and relationship is why the variable is R. So, and I'll explain that in just a minute. So when we find a correlation, right, it's when we find, so it's kind of like lightning and, well, let's see. It's when we look at two things that may have a connection. So for example, there's a connection with heat raising, so temperature of heat. So if it's really hot outside, the amount of crimes go up, right? And all places all over the world. So that is a relationship. It doesn't mean that they're cause and effect. That means that they have a relationship that is connecting them, right? So a correlational coefficient is here, hold on, let me go right here, okay. It's the correlation coefficient is the measure of how strong the relationship of two variables is. So for example, we have two sides. So there's a positive relationship that goes up to 1, and then there's a negative relationship that goes to -1, right? So if it's a strong relationship, the closer it will be to either 1 or -1. 1 is the perfect correlation, okay? Either whether it's negative or positive, which and negative and positive is dictated by which way the line is going, okay? And positive would be plus, and the minus would be negative. So let me show you an example. So how we take data for a correlation method is scatterplots. So if you guys can highlight scatterplots, this is how we get information from correlations. So this is a picture of a perfect relationship of a scatterplot. So you see the lines, so here's the data points, right? And if we draw, this line is a perfect one relationship, right? So a scatter plot is a graph. Oh, here, let me move my camera so you guys can see. So a scatter plot is a graph comprised of points that are generated by values of two variables, right? The slope of the point depicts the direction, while the amount of the scatter points, so the amount of the points you pick is the strength of the relationship. So this is a perfect +1 relationship. So you could say, so what if, this side could be, let me show my, hours of studying, right? So hours, oh gosh, this is awful handwriting. Hours of studying. Let's do, okay, study. All right. So hours of studying, so the more hours that you study, right? And let's say that this is your grades, right? So grade percentage, right? So grades, right? So what it's showing is the more time you study, the more likely your grades are going to increase. So there is a positive relationship between hours of studying and getting good grades, okay? So let me erase this. Dun, da, da, da. All right. Dun, da, da. And I'll probably miss a little dot. Okay. Dun, da, da. Let's do another example. Okay. So an example of a negative relationship looks like this. And I want you to, so when you hear negative, people think bad. It's not bad. So -1 and +1, they're just ways the angle of the board it's going. So if your line is going downward, it's a negative relationship of some sorts. And so what that means is, so say this left side, so follow my mouse. So say the amount of times you brush, right, each week, correlates with less cavities, right? So the more you brush, the less cavities you're going to have. So there is a negative correlational relationship which is still a relationship. So again, get rid of the whole negative, like being bad. It just means that it's going downward on the scale, okay? And then if there's no relationship, it looks like this, right? So if there's no connection, it's the scatter plots are all crazy, right? So, and again, this is how we this is how we look at data for correlational relationships, okay? All right. So again, here's another example. The scatter plot below shows the relationship between height and temperature in people. So let's see, so temperature scores, so if they have a higher temperature, and then if there's a correlation with your height in inches, it looks like there is a tiny line right here. So if we were to look at this, I would say there's one like right about here. And this would be a plus 0.63 relationship. So it's not +1, but there's still a strong relationship. For the AP test, do not worry, for all my AP Psychians, you will not be made to do math. So what you will be seeing is given this graph, and you'll say, they'll probably ask you, is this plus 0.63 or minus 0.63? And you want to make sure you say plus because it's going upward, right? So that's the extent of our math skills for psych, right? So nothing too crazy. All right. So again, correlation and causation. So if you've ever taken stats, correlation does not mean causation, okay? So it does not mean that it's a cause and effect relationship. So correlational studies are only judging the relationship. So low self-esteem could cause depression. So they found the lower self-esteem, the higher depression. It's a relationship, but there's many factors that go into it. So we can't just say if you have low self-esteem, you're going to have depression, right? Because it's not as cut and dry as that. So another example is, depression could cause low self-esteem. Again, it's just a relationship, but it's not cause and effect because there's too many factors going in, right? We're not accounting for all our factors. So again, correlational studies, they study the relationship of two events or two things, and you study them through scatter plots, okay? So now I would like you to make a little squiggle in your notes, and we are going to go to, here's a little fun fact. Shark attacks and ice cream eating are positively correlated, but does not cause one another. So fun fact. Okay, so before you do your squiggle, I take it back. I want you to do one more vocab for correlation. There is such thing as called an illusory correlation, and this is a vocab, and it's an illusion, right? It's an illusion correlation, and what that means is the perception of the relationship where there's no relationship that actually exists. So this is where our human brain could be biased, and it's like, there has to be a connection between eating ice cream and crimes, right? But if there's no evidence supporting it, it means that it's an illusory correlation. It's an illusion correlation. It does not exist, right? So people who, are trying to make something work, but there's just nothing to back it up. All right. So we don't need these ones. Okay, so experimentation, my people. So now do a little squiggle. We just did correlational studies, and now we're into the experiments. So the experiments are the ones who are exploring cause and effect. Okay, so please, underneath experiments, they explore cause and effect. Unlike correlational studies, they're just the relationship, right? So the experiments that are done in psychology, this is where you're going to learn about the independent, dependent variables, what's being manipulated, and all that, okay? So like other scientists, experimentation is the backbone of psychological research. They are used to isolate causes and their effects, right? So point A is directly connected to this outcome of point B, right? So experimentations, here we go. So the rest of the slides until I say we switch are about experiments, okay? So buckle in. So exploring cause and effect. So many factors influence our behavior, and experiments need to include a manipulated factor and then a control factor. If you've ever heard of control group versus having the group that's actually getting the medicine. So if anyone watches Grey's Anatomy, this is all up in your happiness. So again, the effects are generated by the manipulated factors, which we will then realize the cause and effect relationship. So again, experiments have manipulated factors while other factors stay in the control group. Okay. All right. Oops, sorry. Okay, so a part of experiments, you have to have a random assignment. And what random assignment means is when we finally have a random sample of participants, For an experiment, we need to have the participants have the random assignment, so half the group gets the actual medication that they're studying, while the other half is a control group, right? And this is because if everyone knows that they're getting the experimental drug, some people can, if you've heard of the placebo effect, some people can either heighten their responses. Our brains can create biases if we know what we are getting, right? So again, we need to have the random assignment within our experiment. So again, part of the experiment, there's going to be one group that has the experiment group, which is that's going to receive treatment, while the other group is going to be the control group, which only receives no treatment, and they are given a placebo. And we'll talk about what a placebo is in just a little bit, okay? So again, part of experiments, you need to have two groups, a control group and an experiment group, okay? So a procedure that a lot of doctors use to try to take away human bias, and again, if you watch Grey's Anatomy, there's a lot on double-blind procedures, but what a double-blind procedure is when the patients and the experimenters do not know which one you're getting. They do not know if they're giving you the real placebo or the real medication or the placebo treatment. And the placebo treatment, just like on our slide, I'll move my camera, it's a fake treatment given to control the group because the placebo effect is when people, so if you've ever say you've had a headache and the minute you take Advil, you start to feel better. Advil doesn't work that quickly, but our mind knows that we're getting treated, so it can affect our results. The placebo effect is fascinating, okay? So the double blind is essentially both people are blind to what you are getting. The doctor doesn't know and the patient doesn't know, okay? And this helps decrease bias, right? Human bias, because us humans love to create biases in our own world, right? All right. So within this experiment, we are going to have an independent variable, okay? And the independent variable is the factor that is getting manipulated, okay? So this is the factor that gets manipulated. It's the one that gets changed, okay? So, and the independent variable is usually the focus of the study. So for example, when examining the effects of breastfeeding upon intelligence, breastfeeding is the independent variable because that's what you're adding into the mix to see if there is a change in intelligence, okay? So breast milk or breastfeeding is the manipulated variable that we're working with. And then the control group would be the babies who are on formula, right? Or not on breast milk. So it's their control group, right? So again, independent variable is what is getting manipulated, is what is getting changed by the doctors. All right. And then versus on the dependent variable depends on the independent variable. So the dependent variable is what might change in response. So for example, in our study that we talk about, the effects of breastfeeding upon intelligence is the dependent variable because that is what might change due to the independent variable, right? So the independent variable is what is the one that's being manipulated, and the dependent variable will change or might change due to the independent variable. So kind of think of like the dependent variable depending on the independent variable to make a choice, right? I don't know if this is helping. I would highly recommend coming up with mnemonics because a lot of students get independent and dependent variable mixed up, okay? All right, and just to kind of recap before I end this video and to start the next module, for AP, not for Gen. This is just a quick review. We had our descriptive methods, right? So our descriptive methods is to observe and record. So that is our case studies, our surveys, and our naturalistic observations. And then we talked about correlational studies, which is all about how we can connect relationships. Again, nothing is being manipulated, right? And then experimental, that is where all the money goes with psychological funding, this is where we explore cause and effect, and the independent variable is manipulated, okay? So let me move my screen. So if you want to take a look at this graph, it's a really great way of summarizing what we just learned in both videos. Okay. I will let you guys move on to your activity.